Hello everyone, my name is Srjan Sremac. It's an unpronounceable name if you are not from this region. Sometimes I'll tell people call me John if it's easier for you. The topic of my paper today is masculinity, spirituality and male wartime sexual trauma. This is a paper that I published together with Roald Hanserfort, a colleague from Amsterdam.
I'm sorry, because you are standing, you have to take my microphone.
It's okay.
So, or maybe,
Yeah. And we published this paper in the Springer Handbook of Trauma and Culture. I'm not an expert in sexual violence. I'm a religious studies scholar, but I'm interested in implicit religious meaning in sexual violence. It seems that no one, actually there is a really several maybe research that approach sexual violence from a religious perspective. And what I'm going to do actually to examine the relationship between male wartime sexual trauma, masculinity, and post-traumatic spirituality. As I said, I'm interested in the religious aspect, which is not, it was really, really difficult to find explicit religious messages in sexual violence. Anyway, I focus on masculinity as a religious construct and cultural construct as well. The paper will explore the following: the relationship between trauma and conflict-related sexual violence and its impact on psychological well-being. I'm not sure, I mean, I'm not so fond of 10 minutes presentations, but
this is the only time you have.
Yeah, I know,
so
I know.
Please be careful.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to present everything.
I mean, I'm sorry, we just ask you kindly, to give us key points,
Okay.
not to use all your presentation, so if it's possible to have some time for questions
Sure.
and discussion.
Then I will examine the roles of cultural, often religious, bolstered gender norms in sexual traumatization and the connections between masculinity and post-traumatic growth and spirituality. And I use the term religious for the socio-cultural tradition, referring to the sacred and spiritual for the personal experience, meanings, and practices. So it is kind of in line with Kenneth Pargament's work on religious coping. There is a huge debate about spirituality and religiousness. Is there any differences? So for me, the concept of lived religion works very well in that way. So in male-to-male sexual violence, the body is both a site of power, conflicts, and a sign of contested cultural and religious meanings. So in wartime, individual bodies become the metaphoric representatives of the ethnic and or religious body as well, and raping a body symbolizes scenes and overpowering the victim's ethnic and or religious group. So conflict-related sexual violence ethnicises the human body and defines the body as national, cultural, and possibly religious territory. And Rada Drezgic did a wonderful paper on masculinity and body as well in the context of war, in particular in Serbia in 2010, but she recently published a new article in 2015 about that. So it's excellent research on the role of masculinity, religion, and nation-state building. So the impact of sexual violence is intensified by the cultural and religious taboos on homosexuality. And this is connected with my previous work on sexual nationalism in the post-Yugoslav space. If you are familiar with the concept of homonationalism in Western Europe, which means, for example, in the Netherlands or Sweden or even in Israel, being pro-gay, which means it's a part of our national identity, for example, in the Netherlands. So we are tolerant, that's part of who we are actually. In Eastern Europe and Russia as well, I call it sexual nationalism, which means that you are anti-gay, which means that you are going to protect your religious, traditional values from the West, which is going to destroy our patriarchal system. So there is a difference between sexual nationalism and homonationalism, and here I think that the sexual nationalism is very explicit. And let me go further. The problem of male sexual violence in conflict zone for this reason remains a public secret, that you already talked about that, a hidden topic and the forgotten method of torture. CRCV as a terror tactic touches on fundamental aspects of identity, sexuality, spirituality, and culture. What we did in our paper, we analyzed testimonies from the ICTY, International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia in The Hague. So this is methodologically a big problem, because those testimonies don't come from first-hand experience, but come from witnesses. So it's a bit problematic, but anyway, it was really difficult to find people who are willing to talk about sexual torture. And it was also difficult to find explicit religious aspect in those testimonies. The ICTY made a wonderful movie about sexual violence. You can find on YouTube. It's focused on female sexual violence, but anyway, it's excellent. The only thing that we find here is a religious aspect. Is here. For example, this comes from Omarska camp. They said they were deliberately aiming their beatings at our testicles, saying, "You will never make Muslim children again." Of course, this is also not only religious, but cultural as well. But anyway, we try to find some connections with religion. So, male rape victim suffering includes being made weak and effeminate. This subordinates the victim's status, making him inferior as a man by social norms that are present mostly in the male-dominated and homophobic society. Not only in the Balkans, you have similar examples in Africa, for example. So the acts of sexual violence bolster the sense of masculinity in the perpetrator. When the other is made weak and powerless, the perpetrator gains hyper-masculinity, or kind of militarized masculinity, especially during the war. So a cult of masculinity functions in socio-political supremacy in order to masculinize and empower the perpetrator and feminize and disempower the victim. So basically, in society, the message is a victimized man is not a man, a raped man is not a man. So this is the reason why people are not, they're afraid to talk about that. It's not only that you are raped as a man, but you are in that kind of homophobic society, you are homosexual. So it's a double kind of stigma for those people. The objectified body is rendered passive and vulnerable and is used as a means to dehumanize and emasculate the person. At the same time, the sexual torture or penetration of the body, either sexually or as a physical harm, undermines the self-evident boundary between the self and the other. 3 minutes, only 3 minutes. This is also very problematic. The sexual dimension of these acts of violence includes issues regarding the possible experience of involuntary erections and ejaculations with the context of non-consensual sex. And those biological responses also makes people insecure about their sexual identity later. And let me say something about post-traumatic growth and spirituality. Traumatization is not always detrimental to spirituality, but may even enhance the person's spiritual engagement and growth. My previous research focused on religious experience, specifically conversion experience among recovering drug addicts. And you can find that traumatic experience actually led them to conversion, to radical religious experiences. So trauma can be kind of outcome for a religious experience. So Kamil and Breznic investigate long-term consequences of the Holocaust and find that survivors and survivors' offspring express greater belief in God and greater belief in a better future. So there is a kind of post-traumatic growth and spirituality. And what we try to do, we used James Nelson book, Male Sexuality, Masculine Spirituality, and he defined two types of masculine spirituality. both offering a positive view of body and sexuality grounded in theological notions of incarnation and resurrection. It's a bit theological, Christian, but can be applied for other religious traditions as well. So the first, often associated with traditional masculinity, can be termed phallic. It's symbolized by the erect male organ and can carry meanings of power, dominance, and penetration. For example, if you analyze discourse of religious communities, religious leaders in Serbia, you can find that kind of masculine spirituality. And my famous example is on blasphemy, that I recently published a paper on Conchita Wurst. If you are familiar with Conchita Wurst, in that time that Conchita won the Eurovision song, we had terrible floods here in the Balkans, and the Patriarch of Serbian Church said, well, this is the sign from God that we have to repent. All kind of masculine discourse. The only thing that no one informed the Patriarch that Conchita is from Austria, not from Serbia. So the second types of masculine spirituality that Nelson calls penile. Penile masculinity is like the theological via negativa. I'm done. Yes. Characterized by receptivity rather than penetration, creating space for others rather than dominating them. In penile masculinity, touch, passivity, and intimacy are welcome, while it is highly ambivalent in phallic masculinity. So this is important when we doing counseling with people who are sexually tortured. And we use a narrative approach in order to recreate victimizer identity, but maybe for next time for discussion.